Hi everyone. Today I am going to talk about adding and removing elements from the ArrayList example. In this example, I am going to add and remove elements from an array list of students, the line that I am highlighting. In your Google Drive, you should have the project that you see before you, the ArrayList example, adding and removing elements. There is a course class, a student class, and a driver. We're going to focus today on the course class, which is basically a collection of students. And our driver, as you can tell by the relationship arrows, make use of both classes. So I'm going to come back to the course class here. Like I said, our course class is a collection or an array list of students. This array list gets populated in our constructor, which is right here. Our first line of our constructor creates our array list object, and I am not going to go into the chunk of code that you see here. You can take a look at that on your own. If you worked on the document and word class from chapter 6, this should look familiar. On a very, to summarize what this does, it looks through the file name that is being passed in as a parameter, and it fills the array list with the students from that file name. It also generates a random grade for each student. So this should be something that's familiar to you. If you're looking at it and it seems confusing or weird, or you have questions, please do bring it up in class, or feel free to come to tutoring. All right. So let's take a look at what we are going to talk about today. So I'm going to scroll down here in course. Past get student list, past average course grade, and we're going to look at remove student and the method scores above. I've copied and pasted, actually not copied, I screenshotted remove student out into OneNote, which we'll skip to in a moment. But before we do that, let's take a look at the documentation. Remove student says it's going to find the first occurrence of the student and removes them from the course. Now the student is going to be our parameter, right? It's the value the user is going to give us. So we've created this method so that a user can call remove student and pass it a string, which should be a name, and remove student will remove that student from the list. The return value is a Boolean value because it is going to return true if the student was found and removed. If the student is not found and removed, it is going to return false. So this method will give us information back as to whether or not it was successful. So let's jump over to OneNote here and take a look at finding and removing students. So let me switch to a pen here so we have something. So we have finding and removing students. Publicly remove students, string p name, that's our method header. We have a for loop that goes from 0 to students.size. I'm sorry, I'm not using a pen here today, so the lines here may look a little weird. Right. Let's see. All right. So we have I is 0 to I is less than students.size. So our iterator begins at 0, and for the purpose of this method, we can say that I stands for index, and we're going to go up to size, but not including size. So we are going to go up to the last index, right? The last index of our array list should be size minus 1. And we are going to increase size, or increase our index by 1 each time, because we want to look at every element in our array list. I'm not going to draw you a visual of what our array list looks like, or visually. At this point, if you're looking at this video, you should understand that. If not, please come to tutoring, and over the next couple of weeks, I will try to make sure that I create a video for an array list introduction as well. So our first two lines in our loop here, let me circle it. Our first two lines in our loop here is where we retrieve our current student and where we retrieve the name from that current student. So if we're looking at students.getI, what's happening here is we're taking the array list students, and if you've forgotten the name of our array list already, let me jump back to BlueJ. Let's scroll all the way back to the top. We have an array list of type students, right? That's our element tag, and the name of our array list is students with an S. So we take our array list and we call get, and when we call the get method, we've got to pass it an index, right? Which index do we want? Well, we want the element at I, and we're going to take the object that's being returned and assign it to, oh, sorry about that. We're going to take the elements at I, and we're going to assign it to, let me see if I can use a highlighter instead. And we're going to assign it to current student. Right? So students I get I returns a student object. We're going to assign it to the variable current student. And then we're going to take current student, and we're going to call getName. Now, getName is a method from the student class. I'm not going to bother opening it. I'll just describe it very briefly. If you're at home and you're watching this video, you can go ahead and pop open student, pause it, pop open student at this point. You'll see that getName is one of the methods, and what getName does is return a string that represents the name of the student. And we store that value inside of current student name. So once these two lines allow us to retrieve a student, then retrieve its name, so it's a two-step process. In the commented outline below, you can see that I show you an example where you can do it in one line. Current student name is assigned students that get I. Then using that object, we call getName right away. So whatever you're more comfortable with. Once we have the student's name in a variable, we can then use it to compare it. We call .equals, and we compare it to the parameter. And if it is equal, right, if it returns a true, then my if statement is going to execute. And what we're going to do is we are going to remove the student at that index, right? So when we are, let me switch it. When we remove an element from an array list, so on the right side here, I'm going to, if I can select the right pen here. When we remove an element from our array list, so if this is my array list, right, each ball or circle representing an object, and sorry, I'm not using my other laptop today, so this is kind of not looking so good here. Let me erase that. So 0, index 1, and index 2. My childlike handwriting. So if I was to remove that object at index 1, what's going to happen with our array list is that when we remove that object at index 1, then this object becomes index 1. And the object after that will become index 2, right? So everything gets kind of shifted over automatically. That's one of the advantages of ArrayList. If we have 100 objects in our array list and we remove the first object at index 0, then all the other indexes will automatically adjust, right? So index 1 becomes index 0, index 2 becomes index 1, so on and so forth. So it's a nice advantage to have. So the size of the array list will automatically update as well. But the problem then becomes, if all the indexes are changing, then our loop here is going to generate errors. So I'm going to draw a better example here. So I'm going to come back and erase this. And I'm going to draw a little, see if I can get my mouse skills here to be a little finer. So I'm going to draw a better example, draw a bunch of objects, and I'm also going to see if I can also draw the indexes, and not looking so good. So index 0, index 1, index 2, index 3, index 4. So let's pretend we remove index 1. All right. We get rid of that. So at that point, our indexes will automatically adjust. This will become index 1, this will become index 2, and this will become index 3. If my I is keeping track of where I am, right? So if my I was at index 1 when I removed that object, and the array list automatically adjusts itself, you can see that although the array list has adjusted itself, my I stays at 1. So if we move our eyes over here and we're looking at code, it's at students.remove I. I've removed the element at 1, right? If we pretend that I is 1, the array list adjusts itself. On the very next line of code, you can see that I have a little line here that says I minus minus. So what that line is there for is if I am iterating through this array list and I remove an object, what I want to do with my I now is I want to change it. I want to decrease it by 1 to 0, because if you look at what's happening here, it's going to bounce back to 0, so that the next time it loops around, it's going to retrieve the value at index 1 again, right? So this decreases it by I. It's going to execute whatever code is here. We'll reach the bottom of the loop, and when I reach the bottom of the loop, this is going to update, and I becomes 1 again. And when I becomes 1, I'm looking at this element. Right, if I didn't decrease I by 1, what's going to happen is I would have still been 1, and I would have skipped an element. Hopefully that's not too confusing. If it is, do bring it up in class. But the purpose of that I minus minus is to make sure that we're examining the correct element in the next iteration. Okay. So in this example, when current student name dot equals p name, if it's equals, we remove the element, we decrease our I, and in this case, we return true right away to indicate that, hey, I have found my, I found the student, I've removed it, and we can end the method. So that'll return true. So that's our first one. And our next method that we were going to look at was scores above, right? So if I come back to BlueJ very quickly, scores above, what that method does is it counts the quantity of scores above the specified minimum score. So basically this reads scores above whatever the user types in. If they type in 90, we're going to keep count of all the scores above 90. If the user types in 70, we're going to keep count of all the scores above 70. So when we have collections like a collection of student, I can pose a question such as, well, how many kids have a passing grade? Now, what's passing? It's a 60. So scores above 60. It tells me how many people have passed the class, right? If we had another method that says scores below, then we can figure out how many people have, how many kids have failed, or how many kids have a C or below, or a D or below, right? So I'm going to come back to OneNote. Here's a screenshot of the method. And you can see that we have scores above, int min. First line is int count is assigned 0. Okay, so we're going to use that variable count to keep a total count of how many kids have scores above a minimum value so far. So it starts at 0. And then we have an enhanced for loop. And again, the way we read an enhanced for loop is on the left side. You're usually going to see, or you're going to create a variable to hold a single element from this list. So for each student in students, we're going to assign it to current student. And inside the body, right, this is the body, inside the body of my loop, I'm going to check to see if the current student average is greater than the minimum. If it is greater than the minimum, we'll increase count by 1. We reach the bottom of the loop. We go back to the top. Right, there's no I++ here because the enhanced for loop takes care of our iteration. When we loop back to the top, the enhanced loop will automatically pull the next element in the list and assign it to current student. And we do the same thing all over again. Remember the drawbacks. Obviously, the pros of an enhanced for loop is that you have to keep track of less. You don't have to worry about an iterator value. You don't have to initialize it to 0 or increase it by 1 or set a condition. Instead, all of that is taken care of for you. But the con is you are not allowed to make changes to the list. So in this example, I'm not making any changes to the list. All I'm doing is accessing every element in the list, checking to see if that student's average grade is above a minimum, and then increasing count by 1 when it is. And once the whole for loop is done, you can see that the last line is we simply return count because that variable should now have the proper count. So hopefully this makes a little sense to you. Definitely provide me feedback on what this video was like, and I hope you're having a good night. Good night. Bye.